Well, since my introduction takes a while, I think we'll go ahead. I'm recording this evening just so everyone understands. Sometimes if you want to talk about something personal, just understand it's recorded. And I don't want you to say anything that if you say something you want me to try to edit out, would you let me know? But I am recording this evening. My name is Kristen Brown. I'm a candidate for Trustee Area 3 for San Jose Unified School District. And I really wanted to have community coffees where I could start bringing some of the community concerns to the table and really get a better understanding of what's going on. So I'm really excited to have presenters tonight on this subject of domestic violence. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so it's good timing. And I appreciate that you're joining us tonight. A few meeting norms. This is a roundtable discussion, and we do have leaders from our community speaking with us tonight about the impact of the stay-at-home order for those already in a domestic abuse situation, what trends have been noticed in areas that are ahead of us in the cycle of COVID-19, what survivors are sharing, the resources available, and what plans are to meet the expected change in needs. I ask that we allow these leaders to finish their statements, knowing we will take a few minutes in between if you need to ask for further unpacking of the information they're sharing. Please make use of raising your hand, either physically, this works great, or if you understand how to use the raise hand icon, I'll be watching for that as well. You're always welcome to post your questions in chat if you want me to ask them for you. Everyone has a voice at the Zoom table here. I would like to emphasize my word choice of survivor here. This discussion is to focus on resources and communication for the support of domestic abuse survivors. Everything we are covering tonight is in regard for those that experience abuse to have made or make a courageous change. So I ask you to echo this word choice. Tonight, I have Tanis Crosby, CEO of YWCA Silicon Valley in Marin. Tanis joined YWCA Silicon Valley just over 6 years ago. The YWCA eliminates racism and empowers women. They work at the intersection of gender, race, and violence. The YWCA recognizes that in order to make big, bold changes, direct service is insufficient. Tanis notes that service without social justice is no service at all. So Tanis has led the YWCA into a triad approach: direct service, issue education, and public policy. That can only happen when you're working in partnership with a collective impact mindset. Tanis was the executive director for YWCA Halifax for just over a decade before she came to Silicon Valley after 3 years as the board president for Dress for Success Halifax. And I just want to say, this doesn't say everything she has done. So please take an opportunity to Google my guests, because you'll understand why I'm a little humble tonight that we have these guests speaking. So welcome, Tanis. I'm going to hand it over to you right now and learn more about domestic abuse and our survivors. Oh, I'm not hearing. There we go.
There we are.
Here we are.
So first of all, I wanted to thank you for bringing us together tonight to really connect with this issue, to amplify this issue in our community. I'm just going to keep it brief because I want to hear more from Perla and Rob and from the folks joining us. But what we are all concerned about is that during this pandemic, we know that sheltering in place is not safe for everyone. And in fact, we know, and it has been said, that often the home is where violence and abuse can occur. So we are certainly concerned about the way in which this pandemic is creating more vulnerabilities for communities that are already vulnerable. And certainly we've seen the way in which this pandemic has most notably impacted women and underrepresented minorities we are most concerned about the way in which this is highlighting inequalities, highlighting significant vulnerabilities, and that is certainly the case when it comes to violence and abuse. And like the signs of COVID, the signs of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse may not always be present, may not always be visible, And also those who are experiencing it may not know they are experiencing it. So I look forward to hearing more from the conversation and learning more on what actions we can take together and really recommit to amplifying the very important message that help is available, that we must recommit to identifying the harms of this public health crisis. And by public health crisis, I don't just mean COVID, but the impacts of sexual assault, domestic violence, and child abuse. Because in fact, violence is a public health emergency that is being compounded, impacted by an additional public health emergency. And that intersection of these two issues is what we are squarely focused on in terms of ensuring that survivors have access to service and that we are pivoting our services to meet those new and challenging service paradigms. And you know, it feels a little bit like we're in an earthquake right now. And what happens when there's an earthquake when you're on the West Coast? There's a tsunami that follows, but all of us need to move to higher ground to think about new ways and new heights that we have to reach collectively to address issues of gender-based violence. And I look forward to doing just that tonight.
I muted myself, sorry. Thank you very much. So joining us from the, let's see. We also have Naomi Nakano Matsumoto, and I'm hoping I'm not butchering your name, Naomi. She's the YWCA Silicon Valley Senior Director of Social Justice. She's one of her many hats as coordinating counselors for school districts. San Jose Unified is one of her clients. I'm sure that she has many throughout the county. My intent for part of this discussion towards solution is a guideline for teachers on student check-in during the education emergency. And Naomi, I'm wondering if you could touch on what the YWCA counselors guidelines might be, or if, sorry, you should. No? Okay. I think we'll have to get back to you. Okay. All right. Well, we'll get back to that. I'm trying to unmute her, but I don't seem to. You should be able to unmute yourself too. Okay, she had to take a call, so she'll join us later. So let me introduce Perla Flores with Community Solutions. Perla has worked with issues of gender-based violence since 2003. Her current role at Solutions to Violence Division Director, Ms. Flores oversees domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking problems at Community Solutions, a nonprofit human service agency serving Santa Clara County and San Benito counties. She's a founding member and current chair of the South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Thank you. As Tanis mentioned, really want to hear more what thoughts and questions folks that are joining this conversation have. But one of the things that I do want to share, just to provide a little bit of context, we're very fortunate in Santa Clara County to have 5 domestic violence service providers that can offer confidential services and that are certified to do so. And 2 of those providers, the YWCA Community Solutions, also support sexual assault survivors. And 3 of the organizations, Community Solutions, the YW, and Asian Americans for Community Involvement, also support human trafficking survivors. So all of our agencies came together to support survivors in a way that really is intersectional and addresses the different nuances and forms and manners in which gender-based violence can arise. Our agency typically serves about 2,500 survivors per year. We serve about 2,000 survivors of intimate partner violence every year, about 300 survivors of sexual assault, and close to 200 survivors of human trafficking. All of the work that we do in partnership. We work very closely through the Domestic Violence Advocacy Consortium, the South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking, which the YWCA, as I mentioned, is a part of as well. And we have been very concerned, and we looked at our data 2 weeks pre-COVID, and then 2 weeks post after this, the shelter-in-place order was issued, and we saw a 30% decrease in the number of crisis calls coming through our line during that time. And we saw a 60% decrease in the number of individuals that were actually engaging in services. We're fortunate enough to have a staff of 40 advocates that support survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking. We have a confidential shelter, as well as 24-hour in-person response for domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking as well. So it's really concerning for us because we know that it's not a matter of domestic violence or any type of gender-based violence subsiding. We know that that silence breeds oppression and violence, and so we're very concerned. We've also seen in the last 3 weeks, we've had an increase in number of requests for law enforcement to have a domestic violence advocate come out and support. And we've also seen an increase in the severity of intimate partner violence. In the last week, we actually had 2 survivors that our staff accompanied to a strangulation exam. We currently have in Santa Clara County, we implemented this year in partnership with the YWCA, the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office, the Sheriff's Department, a strangulation exam pilot where a survivor of domestic violence that was strangled by their partner within the last 10 days can receive a free exam through Valley Medical Center because the impacts of strangulation are so severe and far-reaching. And so we've been very concerned to see the increase or requests for that type of exam just in the last week. So we know that the violence is occurring, and our main concern right now is getting the word out to our clients, to survivors, to individuals that are in the situation, that we're still here. I think that there's a lot of confusion around, are the agencies open? And also to be able to reach them, and for survivors to reach us in a way that's safe for them and is not going to put them at further risk. So we look forward to having those conversations with all of you. We did have to put a hold in terms of the number of the individuals that we could bring into our confidential shelter because of concern of exposing either current clients or clients coming in. So we're hoteling. And I think Tanis will agree, we've seen all the domestic violence service providers have really seen a spike in the funding that we're putting forward to provide shelter, food, transportation, and just support around basic needs for the clients that we're currently working with. A lot of our clients have also been impacted in terms of work, less work hours, having family members that were contributing to the household lose their jobs or have their hours reduced because of the industry that they were working in. So these are some challenging times for a lot of survivors and their families. And looking forward to the conversation of how we can provide some type of collective impact on this issue.
Thank you. Well, we also have from the San Jose Police Department's Family Violence Unit, I have Lieutenant Lang with us. And Lieutenant Lang, I apologize for being bio shy for you, but there's not a lot about you I could find on the internet, which might be a good thing for you. I don't know.
Yeah, you know, secretive. Well, first of all, I'd like to echo what they already said, but thank you for coordinating this, and I thank you for allowing us to participate. This is really a good opportunity for us to, you know, bring awareness to this at this critical time. So thank you for doing that. And thanks to everybody else for being a part of this tonight. Just real quick about me, I've been with the police department about 24 years now. I've been a lieutenant for about 3 years, and this last year I've been in charge of our family violence unit. And the family violence unit has a group of detectives. I have 3 sergeants that work for me and 10 detectives. And we do domestic violence investigations. We do child and elder abuse and dependent adult abuse. We do, our threats management team does stalking and domestic violence restraining order violations. So we've got a bunch of people working on those cases. And unfortunately, we stay busier than any of us would like to be because those cases do come in quite often. So just real quick, I kind of want to echo what Perla said. I know that when this whole shelter-in-place thing occurred, first lockdown, everybody was very concerned that we would see a dramatic peak in domestic violence calls. And I'm not foolish enough to pretend like that we aren't seeing some sort of a change in the numbers. But what we've seen, as Perla mentioned, is we're seeing a slight decrease in our numbers of cases that get reported to us each and every day. It's not a significant change, but it is slightly down, which we expected it probably to go up. So as Perla mentioned, we're concerned that people may not be reporting it. So we're trying to get word out through forums like this, because we really do want to make sure that those cases are reported and can be investigated. And we want to do everything we can to try to help cease that violence, because nobody should have to deal with that. So I'm not sure how in depth you would like me to go. I'm not sure if anybody wants to know, but basically I was thinking I might just kind of run through a quick domestic violence call, what the police department's role in that is, and just wave me off if you think that I'm wasting everybody's time. But basically what happens is our department's going to get a 911 call or some sort of call for service. The officers are going to go out and they're going to conduct a preliminary investigation. And as part of that investigation, they're going to make contact with our survivor. They're going to interview witnesses. They're going to try to locate the suspect. They're going to do everything that they can to do a thorough investigation in the field and to figure out if a crime has or hasn't occurred. If we do determine that a crime has occurred, there's various different crimes, and I won't bore you with the different penal code sections, but there are a lot of different crime types that this can fall into. But if it falls into any one of the domestic violence sections, then our county and our department have what we just simply refer to as a pro-arrest policy. So our policy isn't what it used to be 20 years ago or more, where you would counsel people, you would separate them and send them different directions for the night. We absolutely believe in making that arrest, making sure that offender goes to jail that night, to separate that situation and do what we can to at least stabilize it for the time being. Our detectives are going to conduct a thorough lethality assessment. It's a series of very specific questions that are to be asked in a very specific order. And if we get a certain number of yes answers to those questions, or if certain questions are answered in the affirmative, then our patrol officers are going to immediately contact the YWCA in our case, because that's our in-office partner. We have a person embedded within our office at the San Jose Police Department Family Violence Center. We have somebody, her name's Adriana. She's amazing. So we get to work with her every single day in our office. And so we're going to make that call that night. We do also have what we refer to as a high-risk response team, which pre-COVID, we would, if it were a serious case, like Perla mentioned, the strangulation case earlier, those are very concerning cases to us, because those tend to be very high lethality cases. Even if it wasn't a high lethality case that particular night, we treat strangulation as if it were an assault with a deadly weapon. It's no different than if a knife or a gun or something were used. We treat it that seriously. So we try to get the high-risk response team has a YWCA advocate that can respond out into the field and meet with the survivor then and there that night. Unfortunately, that's temporarily on hold, and we're trying to figure out how to get that going again as soon as we can, while keeping everybody safe from this virus that we're dealing with. Anyhow, back to the questionnaire. So the officers are going to ask the lethality assessment questions. Part of that lethality assessment has specific questions on strangulation, on suffocation, because it's not always strangulation. Sometimes it's suffocation with an implement. So we're asking very specific questions to determine what the exact crime was. And the beauty of the form that we have is it assists the officers. So our department is very young right now. I think something like 40 to 50% of our officers have less than a couple years on our department, because we had shrunk for a while and now our department's growing again. So we have a lot of very energetic, very awesome, young, inexperienced officers out there. So with this questionnaire, we can kind of lead them by the nose and make sure that they ask very thorough questions and make sure that we get a good preliminary investigation done. And like I said, we have a pro-arrest policy. So if the offender is available, the arrest is going to be made. The officers are also going to work with that survivor. I already mentioned the YWCA, but the officers are going to look if any firearms are seen on view there. They're going to take those. If they can find any other through consent or some other legal means, they're going to recover all those firearms and take those firearms out of that situation in order to try to keep that survivor safe. Whatever we can legally do, we're going to try to do that. And that's a shall, not a should type of thing. So our officers are supposed to do that. We also, if we're going to offer the survivor domestic violence restraining order, actually, I'm sorry, an emergency protective restraining order, an EPRO is what we call it. So what we do is we offer that to them, assuming they're interested in that, or even we can get it on their behalf if they're not interested in it. If we see somebody that we believe is a victim that may be too afraid to ask for that, our officers can do that on their behalf, and we can call a judge, and if the judge grants it, we can make that person stay away from them. We can make that person forfeit any firearms that they may have. If the emergency protective restraining order isn't a good option, then there are also gun violence restraining orders that officers can use to get those firearms. So there are a bunch of different tools that our officers have available to them, so we can do the most thorough investigation that we can, and also we can do everything we can to try to make a better situation for that survivor. I'm trying to think. Okay, so after that, then the other thing the officer leaves the survivor with, we're going to make a safety plan. Usually that involves working with the YWCA or something else as well, but the safety plan is a critical part before the officer leaves that scene. Once we have the safety plan in place, the officer is going to give the survivor a report receipt. That's going to have the case number, the officer's name and badge number, and that kind of information. We understand that these victims have just been through a very traumatic incident, and they may not remember everything. So what we do is we hand them this card that has a lot of really good information on it. And that way, later, when maybe things calm down a little bit, or when they're with, somebody else, they can read through there and look at other options that are available to them, because it is an overwhelming event. So that's a nice little thing to let them have moving away. So anyways, that's the patrol side. So then what happens is those reports get written, suspects are taken to jail, survivors are offered resources in the field, and then the officers write the police report, and then it comes to my unit. My unit, we take that, we look and see if there's any follow-up investigation that needs to be done. Maybe there's some video that needs to be tracked down, some witnesses that would make for a stronger case. Or sometimes the cases are kind of open and closed on their face value, because a lot of times we get enough out of that initial investigation because our patrol officers do such a good job. And then we just take that case right over to the district attorney's office. So when we have a violation, we take it to the district attorney's office. They confirm which charges should be filed against the suspect, and then that process starts. In addition, once that case comes to our office, I already mentioned the YWCA, but if the survivor has agreed to allow us to forward a portion of that police report to our in-office advocate, Adriana, that I mentioned, then what we're going to do is we're going to forward that to her, and Adriana is going to follow up and make contact with those survivors again, whether they did or didn't get contacted that night by an advocate. So this is another way to try to catch some people that may have slipped through the cracks on the first night. Maybe the survivor didn't want contact that night and they were a little hesitant, they were nervous, they weren't sure what to do. Well, we have Adriana coming through on the backside there, trying to reconnect with them and trying to get them the resources that she offers. And she will make multiple calls to these people and do everything she can to try to connect with those survivors and give them the resources that may be available to them. I think that's pretty much it. I probably left a bunch out, but if you have any questions, please let me know. But that's kind of in a nutshell what the police department does. I did mention earlier, I won't go through a whole bunch of stats, because the stats they're very tricky, but basically our statistics and the way that we track things within our department, they're gathered a certain way. I like them in a certain sense because they allow me to compare 1 month to another or 1 year to another. But what I don't like is that the numbers are just captured based on how our report system works. They're not necessarily actual crimes that are committed. So that I won't bore you with the numbers, but basically a couple of years ago, our numbers went up, and then they've been steady the last couple of years. So I don't know what we can glean from that, but that's in a nutshell what our statistics tell us. I wish, I'm glad that we're having this meeting tonight, but if we did have this meeting after Thursday, I would have a whole new set of statistics, because we asked our crime analysis unit to do a deep dive into exactly what happened during I believe it was about a 3-week period right when COVID started this year versus that same exact time period a week prior. So we're going to really be able to dive into those numbers. Like I said, just looking at it on its face value, it looks like we're down slightly from where we expected to be. and where we would normally be, but we're going to have much better statistics in a week or so. So I'm sorry, I'm a little early on that one right now.
No, that was great. I did have a question texted to me. Someone was asking, because many of these survivors are often not alone, they have children with them. So can you speak a little bit toward, you know, in that initial time, how the officers have been trained to work with children who have maybe seen a trauma now? Or
Yes, so that's a good question. Thank you. So in our police academy, we have scenario training for various different scenarios. And a lot of that is how to interact with children that may have been a victim of crime themselves, whether they were a victim of child abuse or a victim of sexual assault or just a witness to this, this type of domestic violence incident within their home. So they receive some special training on that, and they learn how to interview them. They learn how to basically, we just simply refer to it kind of as a victim-centered approach. So they kind of understand what that child is going through and what they've witnessed. I know that my partners can probably talk more about that, but in the general sense, our officers do get some special training how to do that. I know that there are a lot of other resources when we do get the YWCA or Community Solutions or any of the other, like she said, there are 5 wonderful agencies here in our area. So we have so many good options for our survivors, but they do a lot of just incredible work dealing with those children as well afterwards. So I'll pass it off to them.
thank you. Did Tanis or Perla, did either of you want to speak to that?
Sure. Both of our organizations provide comprehensive services to survivors and their families. The YWCA provides clinical services that include counseling and support for children. We have art therapy that is often used as a way of providing developmentally appropriate counseling and support for children. I'd also like to flag that on our sexual assault response, and I'll let Perla speak to their numbers, but we see a significant amount of sexual assault survivors that are pediatric SARTs. And I will share that during COVID, well, just as Perla and Community Solutions and we all saw the numbers decline slightly. For the YWCA, it was about an 18% decline in our crisis support callers until the end of March. So 3 weeks of shelter in place. But overall, we did not see the number of pediatric sexual assault forensic exam. We did not see a significant decline in the pediatric SARTs. We saw a decline more overall in the adult sexual assault response. So I just want to flag the importance of drilling down to the numbers, and I appreciate that Rob's team is doing so. We want to understand, where must we not fail to do that outreach? How are we recalibrating our services to ensure that we have a comprehensive response? And like Rob, like Perla, the YWCA is ready, prepared, and able to respond now, and paying very close attention to where we need to go next to make sure that we are recalibrating our services to be able to do so in this maybe new norm. So A, the services are available for children, for families. B, we're very concerned about how youth and children in particular are experiencing this crisis. And lastly, I just want to flag the linkage to schools, because the YWCA also provides a significant amount of outreach for sexual assault prevention and education in the schools. We'll reach about 8,000 children a year. And often we work very closely in partnership with teachers who are identifying service needs. And there will be disclosures when we provide those in-classroom presentations and support. And without classrooms being in session, we are very concerned about students and children not getting connected with those services. So we aim to provide some online training for teachers to be able to highlight where they might be noticing differences occurring in a child's behavior. And we aim to be delivering those services before school is out. So we're aiming to recalibrate, respond, and be able to make those services available to teachers as well as children and families.
That's wonderful. Thank you. We got another question. once cases are taken to the district attorney, how many are actually persecuted and continue to be pursued? I think Officer Lang, that's for you. Lieutenant Lang, that's for you.
Yes, that's a good question. So again, this kind of gets into the point where the numbers get a little tricky. So the family violence unit in general, if we're speaking about all three handles, again, we're talking about child and elder abuse, dependent adult abuse, domestic violence, threats, assault, all that. All told, there are about, let me have some notes here just to make sure, roughly around 10,000 cases that get reported to us per year. Now, before everybody goes, oh my gosh, 10,000. The reason I don't like these statistics is that's 10,000 cases that land in our computer system. Some of those are duplicates or triplicates. Some of those are cross reports from other things that we already knew about or whatever. So again, that number is really big and really scary and it sounds terrible, but in reality, it's thankfully it's smaller than that. It's not as small as any of us would like, but it is smaller than that. So out of those 10,000 that land between those three teams that I mentioned earlier, again, so we're backing out of just domestic violence. We're looking at a whole bunch of other stuff, but out of those 10,000, we end up getting criminal filings on about 2,000 of those cases. So roughly, 20% of all three of those together. So the domestic violence handle has a higher percentage than 20%. And the child and elder abuse handle, because of the duplicates and the cross reports from Department of Family and Children's Services, that one's going to have a lower than 20%. So my best guesstimate, because we don't track the numbers the way that I want them to, and I'm asking in fact, I have a meeting Thursday with our crime analysis folks I'm asking them to get me better statistics. So when I go to meetings like this, I have things that are more meaningful to me and would be more meaningful to you. So we're trying to do that. But there are FBI regulations. We have to retrieve numbers a certain way and turn them over to the FBI with the crime reports and all that kind of stuff. So it's not easy to get these people to change, but I'm working on that as well. But nevertheless, on the domestic violence thing, we have out of those 10,000 cases, about 4,000 of those come to my domestic violence team. And out of that, I would say roughly a third, 30%, I think, give or take, would be how many we get criminal filings on.
Okay. Thank you. I have another question from Raquel. Is the major problem since the stay in place under reporting? So, and Raquel, I'm trying to understand your question. Do you think you could unmute?
The question is the major problem under reporting of domestic violence, like notifying legal authorities when there is an event?
I'll take a shot at that one. So initially, like I said, we expected that there would be an increase in reported domestic violence incidents. When we didn't see that, that was our first place that our mind went, is that, gosh, there must be underreporting in this. So there are a bunch of different theories. We don't have any way to prove anything right now, but one of the theories is, well, more people are home, so they would be able to call if there was a disturbance at their neighbor's residence, so it wouldn't be underreported. Some people say, well, no, it's happening within the home, and it may be dramatically increased. We don't know if it's increasing, decreasing, or whatever. All that we know is what the numbers are, what actually gets reported to us. So that definitely, Raquel's theory is definitely one that we've considered. We all know and agree that, unfortunately, domestic violence is an underreported crime, no matter what the statistics are. We know, unfortunately, that there's more of it happening than it's getting reported to us. The problem is, none of us know what we don't know. We can't accurately predict what nobody reports to us. So, there's different models and there's theories and everything else. But to be honest with you, I don't think anybody truly knows. So our big thing is that we're trying to get awareness out through things like this. That's why, Kristen, thank you so much for doing this, because if everybody here tells 5 people and they tell 5 people and everybody spreads the word that this is a huge concern for us, if everybody does that, then we're going to have a much better opportunity to get those things reported to us. The people, and I understand survivors, some of them are in a very tough spot and they don't want to make that report because that may be worse for them later, or they feel that way. And there's a lot of concern there. And I totally understand that. But I feel like what I do in my profession, especially, I can't help them unless we get reported. Me thinking like a cop, I think that person needs to be arrested, and I think they need to go to jail and enter a program and do all kinds of things to try to make it better. But I also realize, I'm a realist, I know that it doesn't always make it better when the police get involved. So that's why we have such wonderful partners. Like we mentioned earlier, the 5 agencies that do this in our area, they're a lot of times able to do more than we can. We do our share, but they do a lot of really good work too.
If I can add to that, thank you for saying that, Rob, because I think that it's really important to put out there that the support from advocacy agencies is not contingent on the survivor reporting. And in fact, I'd say only about 30 to 40% of the survivors that we work with at Community Solutions have actually made reports to law enforcement. So that's why it's so important that in the law, there's a provision in the evidence codes that any communication between a survivor and a confidential advocate is privileged. And we also can offer confidentiality. And sometimes down the road, after a survivor feels comfortable working with an advocate, they might be ready to report. We just want to make sure that they know if you reach out to us, if you come into the shelter, that doesn't mean that you have to file a police report. There's also support. A lot of times, a huge concern is when there's children involved. So we make a really important part of an advocate's role is to explore options with survivors and to let them know if there's children involved. If you take the children and come into the shelter, you would call the DA's office child abduction unit and file a good cause report. And then you have and that report is basically saying, I didn't kidnap my children. I took my children out of the home because of good cause, because there's domestic violence. And then they can be accused of kidnapping. They would also have some time to follow up in court with a request for custody and other types of support. So that piece is really important. We work very closely with law enforcement, particularly through our family justice centers. And we also want to stress that sometimes the survivor is just not quite ready to make that report. But fortunately, the person could still avail themselves of all the advocacy services, shelter, support, therapy that are available until they feel ready, if they ever feel ready to report that.
Thank you.
Could I just add this notion of survivor choice? It's really centering on survivors loving the person who is hurting them, and simply walking through the journey of a survivor. A survivor may choose to not leave, and our job is to support the survivor in their choice and provide them with options, provide them with choice. And so defining what is right for what we hope for survivors to heal, to be safe, and ultimately it is their choice. So I really want to zoom in on that, because it's not our assumption that reporting or prosecuting is a successful outcome. Our definition of a successful outcome is supporting the survivor in achieving what they choose. So I really want to amplify that we as advocates work to support the survivor in achieving choice and opportunity and freedom in ways in which they define it.
Thank you for reminding me that it should be survivor centered, because obviously I think, oh my gosh, if that was happening, of course you would take this path, and of course everyone has their own feelings to what will guide them, right? So I appreciate you putting that lens on it. I did want to circle back because Lieutenant Lang had talked about, you would think with neighbors walking around and hearing each other, some of the reporting would go up. Can you, sometimes I hear something at a particular house I walk by enough that I'm tempted to do something, but I hesitate. So could you speak a little bit towards, if you are hearing things, what are clear triggers that should invoke you trying something, when you do, when you don't? And would any of you be willing to speak to that?
Sure. Well, I think that there's, did you want to go first, Rob?
Go ahead, Perla.
I think for us, when we do a couple of things, there's individual safety planning that we do with survivors. And there are times where I mean, I've had situations with survivors where we work with a lot of survivors that are perhaps low income, and so they're renting a space inside somebody else's home. And I've had times where I have the safety plan to say, would the person that's renting the other room be willing to call the police if you give them a code word, if they hear you yelling? Like, no, they don't want to get involved. So a lot of times individuals don't want to get involved. And so when we're doing the individual safety plan, there's been times where I've said a couple of times to survivor, if your roommate doesn't want to get involved, let's have a plan where you text your roommate and your roommate knows to call our crisis line, and we know the address, and then we will call and have the police come out. So safety planning is very individualized. And in terms of when to get involved, when we go out and do community outreach, I always feel that if there is a situation that's dangerous, where you hear somebody screaming and they're obviously in danger of being seriously hurt or worse, then we'd say we can't force anybody to call the police, but we'd say just do what you would want someone to do for you if you were in that situation. But at the end of the day, and if you don't feel like you can call the police directly because you don't want to get involved, take down the information, have somebody else call, you can call in anonymously. So we do encourage that in situations where there's high risk and the probability of somebody being seriously hurt, or again, sometimes even worse, having their life taken.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, I think I'd like to add one more thing on that.
Yes.
Perla made some great points there. So everybody knows when it's clear that somebody should make a call. That's the easy one, right? The hard one is, gosh, I hear something, I see something, I don't really know, I don't really want to get involved, I don't want to be involved. Well, when you call 911, you can be anonymous. You don't have to give them your information. Your phone number is going to pop up, and they're going to be able to probably call you back, but nobody knows what your name is. You don't have to be a witness and show up and testify in court and give a big statement if you don't want to, that kind of stuff. But what I kind of like to remind people is, and Perla touched on it, what would you want somebody else to do for you? And what I think, the way I try to remind people of this is, or think about this is, if that survivor is in a bad spot and afraid to call on their own, you might be doing them a favor by calling for them, because they may fear, if they're in the middle of this fight and the police just show up, it's clear that the survivor didn't call the police. So the suspect's not going to be trying to take it out possibly on the victim or survivor if somebody anonymous, a third party, calls. So in a way, it may be looking after the survivor in a couple ways. One, because we're trying to stop the assault that's happening at that time, or the fight or argument or whatever it may happen to be. But two, by being that anonymous third person that gets involved, you may be helping them. Again, the flip side is always true too. Unfortunately, we may cause more trouble for them if the police get involved. There's no crystal ball, but I think that's why you just circle right back around to what Perla said, and what would you want somebody to do for you in that circumstance? I think a lot of time erring on the side of making a call and letting the police get involved, I think might be a good idea. That's just my 2 cents though. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll circle back to Naomi if you can join us now. And you're taking a call. I was asking, what are some of the guidelines that you're sharing with your counseling staff who are working with students in the district with their check-ins?
Hi, this is Naomi. Well,
Hi, welcome.
we haven't had as much access as far as working with the students online. I mean, we have been sending out materials for our, I guess, our teachers and administrative staff at the school districts, and have asked them to be able to pass that on. We just, because of where we were as providing more of the sessions in class, we don't open up individual cases with these students. Now we have our counseling staff who do therapy with students who may be, and Tanis probably talked about it, our Healing Center program, where they work one-on-one with many of the students, but we are more of a classroom presentation style program.
Have you had teachers responding to you for the materials that you're using, that they'll be using it?
Yes, they've, some of them have passed it on to their students. And we've developed from K through 12 curriculum that we've sent out to our schools. And then we are currently also, I know it's an older group, but we are working with San Jose State to provide information and education for them.
I keep forgetting I'm muting myself. I'm sorry. Did you have more you wanted to say on that, Tanis? I thought I saw your hand.
Just to say, what I appreciate about where we're having the conversation is identifying, look, there are problems with connectivity, right? We want to make sure that people are connecting with and accessing the services that they choose. We want to equip our community to be able to know what to do when, and be able to have the support to know what to do, to reach out to 911, to reach out to Community Solutions, YWCA, and other agencies who can provide support. And then thirdly, we want to make sure that we have resilient, connected teachers who are supported in knowing how to navigate, how to support, and how to connect students. So what I'm really looking forward to as we continue to work so closely with our partners like Community Solutions, like San Jose Police Department and school boards, is defining how we can strengthen those points of connection, how we can strengthen the ways in which we're collaborating together to make sure that teachers are trained, to make sure that students know where to go for help and assistance, to continue to work on innovative solutions like Safe Chat. And I don't think we've mentioned that yet. Perla, would you like to share more about Safe Chat SV?
Sure. So Safe Chat, so 4 of the 5 domestic violence service providers in Santa Clara County got together several years ago and launched a virtual platform where survivors of domestic violence can log on. Sometimes they're not able to call over the phone. So they're able to log on and chat in real time, chat live with confidential advocates. And so due to lack of funding and capacity, we had limited those hours from Monday through Friday from like 8 to 4. And given the current situation and trying to really increase those access points for survivors, we've extended the hours every day to like from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and then over the weekend as well. So all of the 4 agencies that I mentioned take turns in terms of responding to that chat line. And we've also put out there that when we have Spanish speaking advocates that are available. So we're starting to also promote that platform to Spanish speaking survivors so that they have an opportunity to go on and access that support.
So just jumping in, that's safechatsv.org. And I'm requesting that everybody on this call amplify that, put it in your Facebook feed, ask 10 of your friends to get it out, because we know that people who need service, when they see service that is being referred by a friend and a trusted source, they're more likely to uptake that offer of help. So please help us amplify that service is available, that different ways of receiving that help and assistance are available, and that you as an advocate are helping to amplify options for people to connect with to help us make sure that those services are used. So Safe Chat is not available for, it certainly could be used. The focus is domestic violence. And we did develop it with youth in mind. We were thinking that, gosh, this was 2014, Perla, when we were all developing this. Is that right? 2014, 2015, that it would be more likely that high school students would feel comfortable chatting online rather than picking up the phone. So it's certainly available. It's not specifically for child abuse. It really is aimed at responding to intimate partner violence. But as Perla mentioned, we've developed this in close collaboration with our community partners, that we've sought to accelerate options and service availability to extend it over the weekends. I think Wednesday is the only day in which we don't have coverage, but we're expanding service, we're pivoting, we're making sure that there are new ways that people can access service that is most important in shelter in place. And really the missing ingredient is help us amplify this message, help us get this out to make sure that the community knows what resources exist. We spoke of data at the top of the presentation. The number one thing we're hearing from survivors, apart from fear that services aren't available, is fear of financial insecurity. And so it is so important that those two things don't combine to form a web that hold people back from seeking help and getting help. So thank you for helping us spread the word and making sure that survivors are connected with services.
Are there other myths that you want to dispel right now that you're hearing as you work with these survivors?
I think that, well, the frequent myths that we hear is that this is an issue that only impacts individuals from lower socioeconomic status or immigrants. That's completely not true. Anybody could be a batterer, an abusive person, and unfortunately, individuals from all types of backgrounds can be victims of domestic violence. So I think it's really important to be very open about the issue and to never make an assumption that there's a certain individual or class or population or community that this issue cannot impact, because unfortunately it's very far-reaching.
And you're working with a community with a lot of, we're very diverse, so a lot of different languages. I know that the training for advocates is about 40 hours. Do you want to put a plug in for languages that are needed the most right now?
So our training is 70 hours because it encompasses domestic violence certification, sexual assault certification, and also human trafficking. And I believe the YW is the same. For community solutions, because we serve the south part of the county, so roughly about 50% of the clients that we serve are Latinx. And of those, about 40% are monolingual Spanish speaking. So what we see in the southern part of the county is, because of the demographic makeup of that area, we definitely see a need for Spanish speaking advocates, and about 70% of our staff, including myself, are bilingual and speak Spanish. We also serve San Benito County, and so we do have a good population of Triqui speakers, and this is a dialect. There's about 68 dialects still in Mexico, and we have individuals in San Benito that speak Mixteco and Triqui. And so we also use promotoras, which are peer educators, community educators that go out to the community and they educate the community about the issues of gender-based violence and also link them to resources. Other languages very closely, I mentioned that we operate the South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking. So we have supported survivors from every continent at this point. And so we work in partnership with other sister organizations. The YW has advocates that speak Tagalog, I think Cantonese, and we really partner with each other to figure out what's going to be the best fit geographically and then obviously culturally and linguistically for any of the survivors that we support. And I don't know when our training, I think our next training is not until August.
Our next training will likely be in May, and as Perla shared, we work really closely to be able to provide culturally responsive services within our agencies and within our network of service. And we also have translation services available to make sure that the support is there. Other ways people can help, Perla, I'm not sure if you all have a donations list, but we would gratefully accept diapers, formula, gift cards. It matters when a survivor receives food, to know that the community is wrapping our arms around families who need some support right now, and that the community is extending that helping hand. It's powerful, it's meaningful. We've been in receipt of lots of handmade masks. They're beautiful. We're so grateful. Our staff have generously received them and put them to good use. We've also been so fortunate that community has provided our team with much needed meals, lunch breaks. So we've really felt incredibly supported by the community, and we're so grateful. And we are so grateful And if you'd like to help, we have a list of things we'd be so generous and so grateful to receive. And Perla, you all probably have a donations list as well, but certainly it means a lot to be supporting families who are fleeing or attempting to flee violence in this moment, to be provided with measures of support and assistance. And we'd be grateful in ways that are immeasurable to keep that generosity moving forward.
Thank you, Tanis. I think one thing I do want to call out is that I mentioned that about 40% of the survivors that we serve are monolingual Spanish speakers. A significant percentage of our client base is undocumented. And these are individuals that are particularly vulnerable because they're not eligible for they're not eligible for unemployment. They're not going to receive any type of stimulus. A lot of them are working in the service industry and have had their hours reduced significantly or lost their jobs completely. And so right now with that, and then there's a lot of fear because right before the COVID situation happened, there's the whole thing around public charge. So there's a lot of fear in terms of there's a need, and then there's fear in terms of seeking support. So that's a community that we're very concerned about. We're trying to figure out how to raise funds and support to make sure that they have sufficient. It's been really, we run a family justice center out of our office in Morgan Hill once a week. And this is a place where advocates, law enforcement, prosecutors, victim witness can come together to provide co-located services for domestic violence survivors. And we typically get about 30 survivors coming in per day, every Wednesday. The Wednesday right before the shelter-in-place order came out, we have 39 individuals that came into our Family Justice Center. The following Wednesday, there were 8, and then it's trickled down. And it's been now consistently like at 5 or 6, but what's really heartbreaking is the majority of those individuals are coming in for food because they've identified, we have a partnership with the food bank. And so every Wednesday when we run the Family Justice Center, we also bring food and distribute it to because all again, these are individuals that are really in need. And now, again, the majority of individuals that are coming in through our Family Justice Center are coming in to pick up those food bags because they know that they're going to be there. So there's a tremendous amount of need. We're very fortunate that we're able to set aside a little bit of funding in our grants to support our clients, but there's definitely a lot more support that's needed. So to put that out there, whatever you can do to help would be much welcome and appreciated.
Thank you. We had a question from Raquel. She has a question about 911. Do you have more to say on that, Raquel?
Yeah, first of all, I think what you guys are doing is amazing. Very inspiring to hear all of you talk about the different programs and solutions, and also from the law enforcement side, the protocols of that. My question is more anecdotal, and I think I heard it on TV, maybe it was 60 Minutes, but a woman called in, understanding that when you're in shelter in place, that people are trapped in their homes or their locations. So my question had a certain duality to it, that the underreporting is that when they're trapped, there's not an opportunity to report something or to get out of the house, even like physically leave the house. So one story that I heard on the news was this woman called 911, which I think you've heard, and she basically said that she wanted to order a pizza, but I think those are some of the safe words that you guys have. But I wonder if the system also with 911 and reporting these things, they also need to be trained how to ask the questions, because they're usually prompting the caller as to what's the nature of the call, and whether they have been educated or informed that in a domestic violence reporting, or when somebody's calling domestic violence, they're not going to be able to say something that speaks to their situation. So there are certain, and the problem is that I've also read that certain code words that have been used have been publicized. They're like, well, that's great, that code word no longer works. But I think that 911 responders need to, on the telephone, because they're the first line of defense when somebody is reaching out, that they actually are the ones asking questions. They're the ones asking the right questions so the recipient can answer in innocuous ways. So that's just my question. If there's sort of like a program that 911 responders are being educated
unmuted. Sorry. Lieutenant Lang, did you want to respond to that one?
Yes, excuse me. I don't know, I've never sat in on the training that our call takers go through, but I know that their academy is very long, and I have gone and been a part of the lectures that we give the call takers and the 911 operators as far as what we do on domestic violence related calls and what information we need as officers responding to that. And this topic's come up. I know it's kind of an urban legend, but I think this urban legend about I'd like to order the pizza to 911. I've heard that for years, and I've asked some dispatchers, and they've heard of these things too. So I think it takes a pretty sharp dispatcher. Thankfully, we have a lot of pretty sharp dispatchers and call takers. I can't promise you that every single time that's going to be caught, but they are definitely looking for things like that because while they're overworked and overstressed and understaffed and everything, just like everybody else is these days, they do a very good job with that. And I know that they do get some training. I can't speak to the specifics of the training they get, but I know that that issue has come up before, and that they are aware of that urban legend that's now developing into something, and there's story after story of people being helped with really bright people picking up on that. And it warms my heart every time I hear one of those. I think it's so wonderful.
That's great. All right. I have a question for Perla. Someone's asking, what % of men are you helping in terms of domestic violence?
So roughly 10% of the individuals that we intimate partner violence survivors that we work with are men. And we offer all of the same services. We are required by law to offer same services and to not discriminate based on gender or gender identity. And I don't know, I could only speculate if that number would be higher if it weren't because of the stigma that comes with reporting. But we do see intimate partner violence as an issue that disproportionately affects women. And it's really based on the way that we're socialized. And when we think about sexual assault, domestic violence, human trafficking, I really want to not see these as different issues that are mutually exclusive from each other, but they're more symptoms of a larger issue, and the root cause is toxic patriarchal socialization. So it's something that prevention is the only way that we can eliminate that type of abuse from continuing into the future. But absolutely, we do support male survivors of domestic violence. And again, for our client base, that represents about 10%. I don't know for the YW that looks differently.
Yeah, it's about 10%, and about 8% of individuals who have stayed at our shelter are non-gender, non-binary, non-conforming. So we also identify that, we want to be really mindful of outreach and support in our LGBTQ communities, and not just isolate this as gender binary, and also recognize that violence can occur in any relationship. I think this is an excellent question, and I really wanted to flag, we work so closely with Community Solutions and the other DV partners, and this has been an area, and I know Community Solutions has also really supported some great training and support in this area. So I really want to call out and compliment Community Solutions in this area. And back to the previous question about 911, Rob Lang and his colleagues have done a really good job. And I really want to commend Rob and others, particularly in this last 6 weeks. I've been really impressed at the way law enforcement has reached out to partner in even stronger ways, to be curious about what more we can do together to make sure that the services are responsive, trauma-informed, survivor-centered, and accessible for those who choose to report to the police and for those who feel safe doing so. So I really wanted to just flag that this is an important question, and that there's really solid collaborative efforts in making sure services are accessible.
I also give kudos really quick to the San Jose PD as well. One of the things that's really important for the service providers is that we are addressing gender-based violence in a way that, again, is nuanced and intersectional. Really happy to share that the San Jose Police Department for some time has been working on a tool when they have a tool that they utilize when they respond to intimate partner violence calls. And now they're adding questions that will also tease out if there's been sexual assault or potential sex trafficking or human trafficking, and are really trying to, again, support survivors across all the different types of victimizations, because it's very rare. But when we ran some data, did some analysis of the survivors of domestic violence that we work with, and roughly 40% report that they were also sexually abused by their partner. And those are only the individuals that are sharing that with us. We've also developed through, in partnership with the YWCA and the other victim service providers, we developed a victim needs screening tool that looks at identifying potential past or current occurrences of domestic violence, sexual assault, sex trafficking, and labor trafficking. And the data that after we had analyzed about 100 of those completed tools, and we found that roughly 13% of individuals that came to our agency seeking services that were not domestic violence related, after we administered the tool, they were also connected to a domestic violence advocate. The same was true, 9% of individuals that came in not seeking sexual assault services identified as survivors and were connected to an advocate for sexual assault, and 5% of individuals that came in not seeking human trafficking services we identified as survivors of human trafficking. So that piece is really important for us to not just to identify all the different trauma that survivors could potentially want support around, but because the immigration remedies and other social service benefits sometimes are dependent on the type of abuse that the individual suffers, particularly for foreign-born survivors. So we're really happy that San Jose PD is using that tool, and we're hoping that that's a tool that can be disseminated and used throughout all of the other law enforcement agencies.
Thank you. Tiffany is asking if anyone could speak about training to work with children that have disabilities, especially in light of, let me scroll down, in light of the recent abuse of an autistic child in the county intake center. That's a news bit to me. I'll want to know more about that, Tiffany. But can anyone speak about training to work specifically with people with disabilities or?
Tiffany, I think you make an excellent point, and I think this is exactly why we need a child advocacy center in our county. We yet have one. It is something that I know leaders have been working for perhaps 20 years. And so a child advocacy center is a way in which we're providing child-centered services for children who've experienced abuse. And this kind of specialized training is exactly what we should expect in terms of the kind of survivor-centered approach, especially for those who are experiencing multiple forms of oppression. So I think this is an incredible on-point question, and this is something I think we need. And this is something I look forward to ensuring that we have in our county with the creation of a child advocacy center.
Okay. I was looking over the report that came out last June, sorry, not last June, June 2017, the Blue Ribbon Task Force report. And it noted reopening self-help center. It sounds to me like that's some of what you have at Community Solutions, but was there a community self-help center that had to close down that we've missed and wanting to reopen? I was trying to understand that aspect.
Not quite sure about that. Are you talking about the Intimate Partner Violence Blue Ribbon Commission?
Yes.
Oh, that's Tanis is with that commission, actually. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit, Tanis, in terms of the purpose of the commission, and then we could speak a little bit about the funding that came from it.
Funding, good.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I had the opportunity to serve as a co-convener of the Blue Ribbon Task Force on Intimate Partner Violence. This was, there were 22 agencies who were represented. It was based on a collective impact model, and the desire was to bring diverse constituents together, including first voice, including client, survivor-centered voices, to identify what can we do to work towards a county where intimate partner violence does not exist. What can we do to mobilize our collective resources and plans and intentions and capacity to work towards the effective response and elimination of intimate partner violence? So that was a big, bold goal. It took 2 years, just about, start to finish. And the report that you spoke of, Kristen, is available. Please read it. It's about 65 pages long. But the intention was to rally a spectrum of prevention, direct service, as well as systems change and capacity building to really look at a comprehensive strategy for addressing intimate partner violence. Because it's easy to just say, well, let's do more direct service, or, you know, we need more education, but really it's the building blocks of putting it all together that will really get traction behind our collective efforts and ultimately create the vision that we want without violence. So that was the intention and the approach. The result is, I believe there's 20 components of recommendations across the spectrum of prevention. Forgive me if that number is not exactly accurate. It's been a little while since we delivered that report. But I do want to highlight that the recommendations were vetted by and through survivors. So those recommendations were brought forth, and we asked survivors, what is your insight on what we need to do next and what we need to do first? And based on that, we all worked very closely, didn't we, Perla, to then translate this strategy into an implementation plan. And then from that, your domestic violence agencies came up with 5 impact areas. Was it 5, Perla? To calibrate on coordinated service, addressing homelessness, increasing legal services, and being squarely focused on language access. So it was a lot of work to get to where we are now. And I'm very proud of the way which we've bravely partnered to develop new services in new ways, and not just madly going off in all directions, not just creating new services in silos, but really seeking to ensure that those collaborative systems are the way in which we deliver services. And I'm so grateful for partners like Community Solutions who really care about service that is survivor-centered, trauma-informed, and built on collaboration. And SJPD is right there with us.
Thank you. Another part of that report that touched me was one of the, you know, because survivors were, so much of the survivors' input was put into it, the comment that I'm tired of repeating my story over and over again because I relive the trauma every time. I know with special education, we've started doing for one-page descriptions so that they're not having to say this is who I am when they're self-advocating. Have you looked at tools to help your survivors to not have to repeat their stories time and time again?
I can speak a little bit to that. So we did, through the South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking, we started a survivor advisory council. And that council is comprised of 9 individuals, 1 sex trafficking survivor that was born here in the US. We have 3 survivors of domestic servitude that are from the Philippines. We have a male survivor from Colombia, a male survivor from Spain, 2 female survivors from Mexico, one of them who also speaks Triqui. And then we also have a survivor from Venezuela. And what we've done, it's been really interesting because I think there's been such a push, and I think it's so important to have survivor input in anything that we do, but really being creative in terms of how we provide, how we have developed avenues so that survivors can provide their input. So a couple of years ago, we started doing this. What we do every year now is we have a media empowerment retreat for survivors. And so we will invite survivors of domestic violence, like human trafficking. A lot of times there's intersections between the two, that are ready to share their story. They're not quite sure how, but this training provides them with an overview of how that can be accomplished. And through this Survivor Advisory Council, we've identified 6 different ways in which survivors can be involved with this work in a way that feels comfortable and safe for them. So one of them is, for example, participating in conferences that we put on just as participants to provide feedback as a survivor, how that felt for them. Actually participating as presenters in conferences, speaking with the media is another option, participating in focus groups. So we bring the information to them. We ask them questions. They don't have to retell their story. Participating in community outreach. And I want to be really make sure that I put out there that for all of the survivor involvement, we want to make sure that we're providing them a stipend, because it's really important to compensate survivors for their time. So again, we've come up, there's about 6 different ways now that survivors can be involved in doing this work. And it doesn't always, it's really going to be up to them if they feel that one of those ways is participating in a workshop or retelling their story. And I think it's really important to have multiple survivors so that it's not all that stress is not put on just a couple of individuals. And we found that that's a manner that they feel comfortable pushing back. And there's a couple of them that say, I feel fine sharing my story. There's others that say, I really don't want to do that, but I'll be part of a focus group, and that's how I'll share my input. So it's really about finding those avenues again that feel comfortable for survivors, and it's also making sure that we're compensating them for their time.
Are we better about being trauma informed in the community? I mean, there's some things you wish that I hear more and more trauma informed trainings and professional development, but is there a way to help get the general public up to speed a little bit so that they're trauma informed in their response to situations?
I can start, and then if Tanis wants to chime in. A big part of the prevention work that we do prevention that's and education that's either targeted towards professionals that could be doing this work, and then we also do a lot of prevention and outreach that's aimed at the community. So I could speak for Community Solutions. I mentioned that we utilize promotoras, who are peer educators, and all of our promotoras, we have 9, 6 in San Benito County, 4 in Santa Clara County. All of our promotoras are survivors of either domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking, so they really understand the issue. They receive a lot of training, a lot of support, and the training that they prior to becoming promotoras, they go through a 20-hour training, and a big part of that training is really about the philosophy of being advocates, and that includes being survivor-centered, trauma-informed, empowerment-based, and non-judgmental. And that piece is really important. So so that when they go out and provide these presentations to the community, they're talking about providing support to survivors that includes that approach. Being non-judgmental, the role is really just to educate, provide options, explore options with individuals. And there's a huge focus on agency for individuals and that choices, having the ability to make choices. So I think it's a really important part of the community outreach that we do, and how to support an individual that's potentially an intimate partner violence survivor in a way that's going to be non-judgmental, that's going to be survivor informed. And we also talk a lot about trauma and its impacts. So that's something that's really important for us.
So what I'd really love to just amplify, because I'm so excited by this program and the great work that Community Solutions is leading the way on, the centering that the community education be led by first voice communities, that it's not a YWCA expert teaching, it's lifting up the experiences, truth, and reality of survivors, and supporting education based on that truth is powerful. So within that spirit of being survivor-led and trauma-informed, the YWCA also has a promotora model. Our last graduating class, there was about 10. The intention is to reach diverse communities and lift up those voices, connect people with service, and provide that training. We also have a youth-led program in our prevention efforts where youth are leading. Youth are identifying, here's what we'd like to change in our schools. We've identified, here are components of toxic masculinity and systems and policies that aren't working for us in combating a culture that does not support survivorship. So we work really closely to lift up and amplify voice of community to seek and take action on the change that we choose for our communities. And I'd also like to highlight that none of this happens without resources. And we are so fortunate to live in this county that has made an investment in providing support for this critical service and for prevention. And so we highlighted earlier that there was this big, long process, but ultimately that process led to better service. And it was because of advocates. It was because of people who care about this issue, like the people on this Zoom call, who wrote and called and sent an email to their county supervisors and their council members who said, we care about this issue, fund this issue. It is important that we provide support to survivors. And so I'm really proud that the local leaders listened, that we took action, and that this county has supported survivors. And we need to say thank you to our leaders because it is so important to recognize that we've made exceptional progress in this county. And it is because of advocacy, and it is because of people who care like you. And it is resulting in real change. It is resulting in healing and support and unprecedented levels of opportunity to engage and lift up those voices to take action on prevention. So please, when you see Supervisor Chavez and Cortese and all of the supervisors, let them know you care about this issue and say thank you, because they have done remarkable work, as have council members in the city of San Jose. So please let them know that you care and that you notice and that we appreciate what they have done.
Thank you. I'll have to get some thank you notes written, it sounds like. One of the things that the report had mentioned is also that you're so dependent on grants. Even with the support coming at the county level, you're very grant dependent, which takes a lot of time and resources, and to just ask for more long-term funding. Maybe it'd be helpful to know exactly how much of your finances are grant dependent and how frequently you're having to reapply and reapply.
Oh gosh, about 95% of our, I'm speaking for Community Solutions.
Yeah.
About 95% of our funding is grant dependent. So we receive funding at the federal level, the state level, and then here in Santa Clara County. We're very, very happy and really want to echo what Tanis said in terms of the appreciation we feel for the supervisors, particularly Supervisor Cindy Chavez. Up to about 2 years ago, between the 5 domestic violence agencies, we received less than $500,000 collectively to provide support to intimate partner violence survivors. There was no funding for sexual assault survivors at the county level or for human trafficking survivors. So we're very, very thankful that there's a huge commitment, and we definitely have our clients have benefited from that commitment of our county. There's been a lot of funding that put through for domestic violence survivors, for sexual assault. Now we have county funding for sexual assault survivors. This was the first fiscal year that we had that funding. And then for the last few years, we've had funding to support human trafficking survivors. So it's really significant. In terms of how often, so again, 95% of our funding for Community Solutions comes from grants. And we typically have to renew grants every year. And even if we have a grant that's on a 3-year cycle, and it's just a renewal process, it's going to automatically be renewed. We still have to submit every year a request for application, budgets every year, staffing plans every year, budget narratives every year, project narratives every year, along with the other information that's required. And then we're also having to constantly apply for additional funding to make sure that we can keep up the services and the staff that support the clients that we work with.
Okay.
Yes, it's about the same. It actually might be closer to about 85%. I want to flag that government funding is like Swiss cheese, and there's lots of holes, and then the trick is, do the holes align and cover? And fundraising really is like the avocado that binds it all together and fills in the holes. And the frank reality is that fundraising right now is not happening. there's certainly COVID relief funds, which we greatly appreciate. And as Perla mentioned, there are more expenses. We're hoteling and providing more emergency assistance, as it should be. Those things aren't always funded by government grants. Oh, someone's coming in that's my husband.
Bring it to you.
No, I'm good. Just a second, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
So as I was sharing, that it doesn't cover all the expenses, and fundraising right now is looking very different. The YWCA has postponed 2 events into the fall. We hope they can continue. So your help is needed. But to Perla's point, you know what? Saying thank you is also needed. And if you could just let those politicians know that that their help is needed and that this should continue to be a priority, that would be an extraordinary measure, because public support is needed for public health issues. And this is a public health issue, and it will continue to be such. And it would be impossible to fundraise to meet the investment that the government has invested in this service. And frankly, I think that's the way it should be. We should expect that precious public dollars should work towards addressing public health issues.
Mm-hmm.
Public health issue. And the hard scramble of fundraising to keep our doors open and lights on and survivors served is it's pretty tough, hard scramble year to year to year. So we certainly appreciate the investment. I do also want to flag the significant lack of investment from the state of California. Mm-hmm. Would anybody like to guess how much the state of California funds sexual assault services from the general fund? Just any guesses?
0%?
It's $45,000.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
$45,000 funding rape crisis centers in the state of California. So there's not a state investment in responding to survivors. There is not. And our county has had to fill that critical gap. And they have. And it shouldn't be that way. So I just want to really continue to amplify, say thank you, please help us, it matters. Mm-hmm. And supporting survivors with things like diapers, formula, gift card, it matters. And caring about this issue and showing up to talk about it on a Monday night also matters. And I really want to thank you for that.
Well, you know, on a Monday night, I have to say, I imagine your weekdays are very long. So I really appreciate the 3 of you coming to this table to talk about this when you've probably spent all day talking about it. And I appreciate your willingness to continue to extend the message when you're tapped out at the end of the day. So really, thank you all.
Kristen?
Yes.
If I may, yes, as a board member for Community Solutions, I just want to echo that although our Solutions to Violence programs are 95% grant funded, that doesn't it doesn't carry the weight of the way we want to serve our clients. And we too had to cancel 2 events this spring that are critical fundraising events. And we hope to hold our gala in the fall, but we don't know, right? It's uncertain, and that is our major fundraising event. So fundraising continues to be an unknown gap. We do have appeals that we are sending out to our donors. We appreciate each and every one that has donated to us, but fundraising is, I love that analogy of the avocado that fills in the Swiss cheese of the holes, but it is still critical to all nonprofit organizations that serve our communities. And it's challenging for nonprofits right now, especially with, our the way the stock market and the uncertainty and the jobs, and it's tough, and it is impacting our nonprofits. And we do appreciate anyone that is able to help during this time. And we know that those that support us that aren't able to help right now, when things smooth out, we hope they'll come back to us and give when they can. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Sandra. You know, we talk about things happening in the domicile, but sometimes when we're home, we're working now. So I guess, Lieutenant Lang, have you seen some crossover with, you know, work-related situations now that are now crossing into the home?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay. We're meeting, we're all in each other's home to some degree. But if in the, you know, maybe this isn't really in your arena, I don't know, but if I had a work situation and HR knew about it, but, you know, we were suddenly home and I'm still having to meet with someone, you know, are you seeing some of that creeping in? I mean, this is a new situation we're all in.
Yeah, to my knowledge, I don't know of any cases that have come in to us that way, but I wouldn't be surprised if it had. Yeah, I'm not aware of any incidents like that, but I have to assume that whatever way we can find out about a case and investigate it, or, you know, wherever it comes from, we're happy to jump into it.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right. Lieutenant Lang, did you want to talk a little bit about the LAP, the lethality assessment program? Are you using that?
Yes, so we have every officer, as part of their investigation out in the field, when they contact the survivor, they're going to ask a series of lethality assessment questions. And as part of that, there's strangulation questions, suffocation questions, and I failed to mention earlier, and Perla picked me up on that one, but we also now ask sexual assault investigations as well because of the intersectionality there. So those are questions that we have. Those are very specific questions that are asked in a specific order, and they're almost identical across our entire county. So that's something that also goes to the district attorney's office, and the victim services at the district attorney's office. They do wonderful things as well. I know they're not represented here tonight, but in addition to the 5 agencies that were mentioned earlier, the district attorney's office does some very good work to support our survivors. So they get those lethality assessments, and they are able to have a better understanding of what occurred during that incident and the severity of it, again, because every case is a bad case, but the ones with higher lethality, of course, are far more concerning to us because we know how close those can be to a very, very bad outcome. None of us want that to happen.
I like hearing that it's consistent across the county, so that, you know, that certainly does make everyone's job easier. Can any of you speak towards emotional support services that are provided for survivors?
I can start, but I also want to put out there, we're very fortunate in Santa Clara County, the 5 domestic violence agencies also use Dr. Jacqueline Campbell's danger assessment. So it's the advocate version of the lethality assessment for law enforcement. So all of our advocates receive training and have to be certified to be able to utilize that tool. And it's actually a tool that's very helpful to determine how dangerous a situation that the survivor is in, or could potentially how that could escalate. And it was very interesting looking at that data, because we know that survivors share with advocacy agencies things that they might not necessarily share with law enforcement. Mm-hmm. So as we were preparing to start this pilot project for the strangulation exam, Community Solutions looked at our data. We follow up on police reports that law enforcement police reports from the sheriffs, Morgan Hill PD, as well as the Gilroy PD. And so we looked at data, we looked at for a certain period of time, and we found that during the same period of time, only about 13% of survivors actually shared with law enforcement that they've been strangled by their partners. And when we looked at the danger assessment that advocates complete, over 40% of survivors shared that. So we know that strangulation is a very serious issue. And we utilize those strangulation exams, especially if it happened within the last 10 days, to offer that exam to survivors. In terms of emotional support, I think that piece is the most important part of the work that we do. And I mentioned that we work with over 2,000 survivors of intimate partner violence per year. For us, the most important piece is really to provide that non-judgmental, survivor-centered support, really coming from a place that's trauma-informed, supporting survivors' options, helping them explore their options, connecting them to the additional resources that they're entitled to. And it was because we work so closely with all the other domestic violence service providers, we were able to develop joint domestic violence advocacy consortium outcomes that really focus on increasing survivor safety, increasing survivors' knowledge of the criminal justice system, also the civil process, particularly around domestic violence protective orders, increasing their access to services in their language. And I can share that document, but it's for me, it makes me really proud and to know that a survivor, regardless of what agency that survivor goes to, they're going to receive the same high quality level of care, and that we're working. It's really a continuum and a network of support that's available for survivors across our county with the 5 amazing agencies that are part of this group. So I'll let Tanis add more to the emotional support.
I don't think anything more is needed. That is exactly it. But that comprehensive continuum is made possible because of county funding.
Okay.
Being very clear, the services, our clinical counseling services, our therapeutic counseling services, being able to provide support to families whose children have been sexually assaulted, our mobile clinical support, and none of that would be available without county funding. And so it is those comprehensive healing services, the legal advocacy services, the BIA accreditation, and making sure that we have culturally responsive services to individuals that are seeking to stay in our country as a result of violence. All of these services are made possible because of the county funding, because we worked so hard to develop that blue ribbon task force to provide recommendations to show what could be possible when we work together. And so just really amplifying that it's coordinated, it's in partnership, it's based on data, and it's based on evidence, and it's centered on survivor need.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions. Did each of you want to close out with anything that we didn't get to tonight?
I already mentioned it, but I'd just like to mention again, Kristen, thanks for getting us all together tonight. And this really is a great opportunity for us to spread the word when we normally can't be at community meetings or other things that we would be doing. So this is wonderful. And you know, Perla and Tanis, thank you for what you guys do. When I came into the domestic violence world about a year ago, I've been a cop for 24 years, but I haven't worked in our family violence unit before. And when I came over, I was amazed to see the cooperation between the 5 agencies in our county. They really are one team. They work for different organizations. They get paychecks from different places, but they really are one team. And I've been thoroughly impressed with that the whole way through. And it just makes it really easy to know that the survivors are going to get, no matter where they go, because I know a lot of times they don't come to us in the police department for the reasons that were mentioned earlier. We want to help every single one of them if we can. We understand that that's not the reality. We realize that we have a role to play, but our role isn't as big as we would want it to be. But to know that there are people out there that are all working together, it's not a competition. It's everybody on the same team working together. And I've been super impressed with that. So we're very lucky in this county. I know it's been mentioned, the funding that comes from the county. It's amazing what we have with everything that's developed over the last year or two and the funding that's come in there. It's just really cool to see. I'm kind of, like I said, new to this, but it's really opened my eyes. I'm honored to be a small little part of it. To work with professionals like we're talking about here tonight is really wonderful. And I want to just thank them and thank you for getting us all together tonight.
Thank you. Perla, did you want to talk next?
Sure. Also, thank you for the opportunity. I think it's so important to get the information out there. And
Yeah.
And I also want to again reiterate that the services with the different service providers are so intertwined and multi-layered. It really does feel sometimes like just like one big organization across the county. And we wouldn't be able to have that unless each one of those agencies really feels like it's not your clients or our clients, it's all of the community members that we're survivors that we're trying to support. The only thing that I would put out there, I think getting the word out is really important. So we have been working very closely with the local media in our area to develop PSAs that really focus on, we know this issue is still happening, we're still here, call us. We're also working very closely with a Spanish speaking journalist. And we actually has been hosting a show this will be like the 4th week. On Thursday, she'll have on one of our different staff members talking about different issues, domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, child abuse. And so while we're doing those interviews, there's questions that are coming in. Sometimes people can't ask the questions, so she puts it live on Facebook, so they'll send it through Facebook and then she'll ask it live. So really trying to get creative on how we can get the word out there. So any support that you can provide to let people know that all of our agencies are still here. And yeah, I think this is a community issue that we all have a role to play in.
Thank you. Yeah, I walk by bus stops and sometimes think there's a perfect place for another note to go up, telling people where the resources are. Tanis?
So safechatsv.org.
Yes.
Go to that site, put it in your Facebook feed, tweet it. Can I get your commitment and support to do that and to request that your friends do the same?
Okay.
Because if we could commit to that tonight, we could deliver on that intention, on getting that word out. So please help us amplify those services and let them know that help is there.
Thank you all for coming to the table to talk tonight and help me get a clear picture. I know that I've learned a lot tonight, and it gives me security in knowing that these resources are here, and how collaborative you all are is really a beautiful thing. I don't think this happens enough in community services, so I really appreciate that you have that going for your team. Thank you very much for speaking tonight. I'm going to go ahead and say good night then, but thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate it, and I'll be sure to get word out, and we'll get those lists of donations that you need to out as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.